what's something that you guys were taught about money growing up, for example?
I can take that one. I think for me, there are so many different things that come to money, right? Part of it was being entrepreneurial, right? So growing up, actually back in Mexico, my mom had a little store, for groceries and stuff like that. But then on the weekends, she also would sell, like pozole and then tacos. Actually, at some point, even had a stand of French fries, where I would literally every single weekend I would sell French fries outside the store. And then I think that's part of it, right? So talking about money, it was just more about being entrepreneurial in that sense. The issue was about not having conversations regarding how much of the gains, right? Was there a profit, right? And were we doing a good enough job as to saving some of those profits for future things, right? Like you need a new tank of gas or something like that, right? So it's how do you create a budget essentially to really start planning ahead rather than just coming at the end, right? And having to do things right on the spot just because you need to, rather than planning it. I think that's part of what I was taught, right? It was also really difficult, right? Where growing up in Mexico, part of it is just more of you save money, you don't invest money, right? So it's just wanting to be not take as much risk, right, with your money. You want to keep as much as you can, but at the same time, that then that creates other issues later on, right? But so those are some of the things that growing up, I was taught to do. And so I'm actually trying to go back into the entrepreneurial side. I just need to find those ways, right? What are the new things that I could do? So
Yeah, I think I definitely resonate with that. Like, I feel like our communities, we live on a day-to-day basis, so it's really difficult to, plan ahead, first of all, because we're just trabajando, we're just living day to day. A lot of my family and friends, like all they used was cash, puro cash to pay with things. They never had credit cards, even though a lot of them were, for example, documented and they were citizens. They just didn't want to because they said, si tengo dinero, lo compro. Si no, no. If I have the money, I'll pay for it. If not, no, I won't. But it's important to build credit. And, we can get into that later, but definitely just living day to day, that's just the realities for our communities. So that kind of can lead us to una falta de planear, like lack of planning. And so we're not really taught about these things because our parents and the way we grew up doesn't lend itself to planning, financial planning and financial literacy, having a plan, I think. And usually the way we earn that money is usually selling our labor, right? Usually that means using our bodies physically to generate value, which translates into usually, again, a fixed income. So, but I think, yeah, the most important thing I was taught was just like ahorra, stretch the money, stretch the dollar,
yeah.
But it's important to also have some risk and just be open to the world of investing too.
Yeah.
Ruben, do you want to take that a little bit in terms of what you learned or what you grew up hearing about money?
Yeah, definitely. I want to give a shout out to all of us who grew up in the context where our families had some kind of small business, just like a couple of us have said here, because I was around money from a very young age. I remember from a very, very young age helping as early as I knew, I learned how to count. When my dad was charging for his karate, it was like, here, count the money. And that was part of my homework, to count the money. And it was like, okay, now that you count the money, now you need to know, like, how much money do you need for rent of the karate dojo? And how much money do you need for the cleaning supplies of the karate dojo? And how much money do you need to be able to pay some of the debt that we have on the karate dojo? That's the money that goes to the dojo. Now, how much money do we need to pay the rent of the house? And how much do we need to pay the utilities of the house? And how much money do we need for groceries? And then all the money was gone. And he's like, exactly. All the money's gone now. So from a very young age, I knew that as much as you get money on payday, you basically lose it all that same day. So I remember
you actually have the money in hand, and then they'll take it like little by little as all the expenses are coming in.
Yeah, exactly. So
You're a whole
from
accountant.
yeah, so from a very, very young age, I was that. And I remember like charging people, like, so growing up in a small business, I was exposed to money, but I was exposed to the transactional aspect of money. Cobras y pagas, right? Like you charge and you pay. But I don't remember my dad or my mom, for that matter, growing up, them like, I don't know, taking up a community college class on business administration, or reading, business books or something like that, so that we could learn how do we do the business aspect of karate better, so that we could do a better job with our small business. So I think that's something that I'm always eternally grateful for my parents, that they exposed me and made me part of the small business since I was very, very young. And I'm also mindful that I don't think my parents ever took a business class. I don't know my parents, if my parents ever read a business strategy or marketing strategy or anything of like that to improve the business aspect of it. So that was on the business side. On the family side, we never talked about money, right? Like the personal side, the family side, like if you were to ask it, does your family have money? I don't know. I didn't find out that we were working poor rather than working middle class or working upper class until I got to college. And it was in college that I was like, oh shit, I qualify for the federal Pell Grant. That means we're broke. I qualify for Cal Grant. I'm getting a full ride scholarship because we're poor. I needed to realize that, because growing up, I didn't think we were poor. I didn't think we were working class. I thought we were just average compared to everybody around us, because everybody had either a little bit more or a little bit less or about the same. But I didn't develop my class consciousness really to the extent that I have it now until I went to college. And the last thing that I'll share, and I'll pass back the mic, is that I remember vividly in one of my first classes in college, philosophy 2, that the professor, amongst the initial questions that he asked, he was like, raise your hand, how many of you all have a financial aid or a scholarship that's allowing you to be here? And I was like, shit, finally a question that I know the answer to, right? And I like raised my hand. And then I looked around and there was maybe 3 of us with our hands up in a classroom of 250 people in philosophy 2. I don't know if other students were also in financial aid, but they didn't feel comfortable raising their hands. But I do know what it meant and what it felt like to be one of the few BIPOC people in that class, and to be one of 3 hands that raised their hand, being at a public university like UC Berkeley. I was like, holy shit, I'm in a very different environment now. And I have to apply all of the skills that I learned, but I also have to acknowledge that some of these people around me have skills that I don't have because they grew up very differently. If there's only 3 of us in a class of 250 that needed financial aid to be here, welcome to your new world and get ready to navigate a whole new universe. So I think my answer to that question is that as small business owners, my exposure to money was from that transactional lens. Familiarly, I remember being woken up in the middle of the night to my parents arguing or fighting, or my mom crying because we were broke and they had no idea how we were going to make it by the end of the month. Those are some of my most vivid night memories, that at night when my parents thought that we were asleep, that's when they would go at each other and critique each other's spending habits, and like, how the hell are we going to pay the bills? Like all of that always happened at night. So as a business, we were sustaining the business, but as a family, we were struggling all the way to, by the time that I got to college, I was eligible for all the financial aid support because we were broke. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. If anything, that also brings back a memory for me where, the closest thing to talking about money while I was at home, right? Rather than now, that I've been starting to have more conversations with my family. But growing up, the closest thing to a conversation like this was actually my mom sharing or telling my brother and I that we had to move back to the US, right? Because financially it didn't make sense for her to, put us through school out there because she didn't have the money. So the only way that, she could make something happen for us was for her to send us out here to live with my uncle. So that's the closest thing, that we got to ever having a conversation about money. And so, and at no point did we actually talk about, how much money my mom had or anything like that. It was literally, hey, the only way that we can make a future happen for you, right? It's for you to move back to the US. So
Yeah, and like for the people that could see on video, like I'll smile like as I'm hearing these stories because they resonate so much. Like thinking about my experience and what I learned about money, what I didn't learn about money is probably more accurate. I think it was similar where it was like a general sense of like be good with money, but there was no like how do you do that? It was just like you have to be good with money, you have to save money, you have to like do better than us financially. And when I was growing up, my dad had his own like leather making goods company. And then I was a kid and then he lost it. But at that time, none of that was explained to us. And I was just like, oh, what happened? And it was something that sparked in me a lot of like the personal finance, the business side of me, was just trying to understand all of that. And how does that happen? How do you like get your like money straight? How do you do your accounting straight? So a lot of at home was just not talked about. Like, I think it wasn't until I was older that I finally understood like what happened to the business and what happened with my dad and his associates, et cetera. So it's just interesting that a lot of those things were just not talked about. It wasn't something that they had much knowledge in. So I can't like blame them, or I don't like hold it against them, because they grew up in a very different country and a very different socioeconomic status than most of the people I went to school with. And their understanding of the financial systems here was just not there. Like, it's so complex, it's so foreign, it could be very intimidating. So a lot of those things were just not something that even to this point they fully understand. And I've had to do a lot of like self-learning, really try to understand things on my own. And I even took a course when I was at Cal. So I think a lot of it was just lack of knowledge, lack of accessibility. Why would you look into like investing and all this if you're trying to like have money and to put on the table and like you're trying to survive? So that's why like with my family, I don't hold it or like I don't think about it. It was just like the situation didn't lend itself to having these discussions about hypotheticals when you're trying to just like make ends meet and trying to progress through like this immigration story, like immigrant story of people coming to the States. So yeah, a lot of it was just very much so that where it was like, just be good with money, but there's like no roadmap. So it was very much so, I hope you do better than us. And, that was difficult at times to try to navigate through school and like try to understand why we were at such a disparity.